adored my only sibling, my little sister Lynn. As a child, she had a shy smile, golden curls, and a sweet disposition. We slept together in a double bed, and at night we would whisper to each other and giggle. A disembodied voice from the other room would say, "You girls go to sleep. Don't make me come in there." By the time we were teenagers, everything had changed. There were squabbles over borrowed clothes, who didn't hold up their end of the chores, and who got away with hijinks. Lynn once invited her friends, her girlfriends, to a slumber party, and at 3 a.m. they went down to the main drag in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and played croquet in the middle of the street in their baby doll pajamas. I wasn't invited. She didn't want me anywhere near her friends. I was a betrayer of family secrets and deeply resented. At 19, I married and moved 1,000 miles away. Lynn and I visited back and forth, and I tiptoed over eggshells to avoid her quick temper. But we had a lot of fun, too. A little wine loosened our inhibitions, and we told stories about our lives and exploits. We were polar opposites in personality, in style, and in experiences. She was an intimacy avoider, and I wanted to share every heavy, profound, and real emotion. Yet there was always this strong undercurrent and pull to be together. The love we shared was a deep vein. The trick was how to mine for it. Years later, I read Mixed Feelings by Francine Kleigsbrunn, and her conclusion struck me with great force. She interviewed scores of siblings and discovered that sisters tend to stay in touch and have more contact than other siblings. A sister and brother came next, and brothers rarely or not at all. I realized that my husband Horace has a rare relationship with his only sibling Stan. As a kid, they hiked mountains, trekked the Grand Canyon, and drove an old Model T Ford on many adventures. Best friends and loyal companions, they always had each other's back. Squabbles were few and far between. They are now 87 and 90, and when together there is lots of hugging and reminiscing, mutual appreciation, and good cheer. Ms. Clyburn went on to write that countless books have been written about how a child's psychology is informed by interacting with the parents. Little had been written about the importance of siblings, although much has been analyzed about birth order. She observed that the sibling relationship is usually the longest one we have. And the sibling is usually the only person to witness our childhood. That made me think a lot about how I wanted to improve my relationship with my sister. I needed to respond to her differently. It all changed almost overnight, as I saw her as more precious to me than I ever had. And of course, my change in behavior changed hers. It was fascinating that we saw past events totally differently, as if we hadn't even been in the same room. I was devastated 11 years ago when Lynn was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and still can't believe that she is gone from this earth. But we healed every little wound, misunderstanding, and resentment that had ever existed. I think of her every single day and bless the time that she was in my life. Now is the time when we take up a collection for the sustenance of this congregation and our work in the wider world. You can mail a check to the church, noting what it is for in the memo line, or you can go to our website, UUCWF.org. And on the homepage, scroll all the way down to the bottom where it says, click here to donate now. We now have categories for your donations, so you can pay your pledge, donate to the church, or to the Hope Food Pantry, or to another special collection. You can also text your gift by texting GIVE to 503-656-7296 and follow the prompts.
I don't ever remember my sister not being there. She was born just a month before I turned 2, and I have no memories of the time before. Neither of us look especially like either of our parents, but their genes must have combined in a very specific way, because when we were younger, folks always asked my mom if we were twins. We played princesses on the stairs in our first house in McMinnville and slept in bunk beds. I was jealous of her long, wavy hair. Mine was cut into a pixie in kindergarten because I had dandruff. And I was jealous of her status as the younger, cuter one. Plus, she always got to join in on my Girl Scout troop stuff, and I didn't get to join in on hers, which seemed patently unfair. But when it came down to it, I had her back. In one of my most formative memories, I was walking on the beach in Pacific City with my family. I was probably 6 and Carrie was probably 4. It was time to go, and we were all walking back to the car, and Carrie just stopped, crossed her arms and stomped her foot and said, "I'm not going." And Mom and Dad just kept walking on, holding both my hands, walking down the beach in the dusty light. And as a parent now, I know that they would never have actually left her, but at the time, I didn't know that. They just kept walking. And I kept gazing over my shoulder at her determined little face. We are a stubborn breed, we Stanard women. And finally, I ripped my hands out of theirs and began running towards her, tears streaming down my face. And she was sobbing too at that point. And I ran back the 50 yards or so back to where she was, and I grabbed her hand, and we ran back to our parents, who had finally stopped walking, and we hugged them, sobbing. It's important that you know that I have her permission to tell these stories. We each have our own stories about our childhood, and they are probably fairly different. But we did a lot together. Fancy stuff like trick-or-treating and baking gingerbread houses, and ordinary stuff too. We fought like siblings do, and I was sometimes a jerk, and she was sometimes a pest. While we looked too much alike for me to get away with the typical older sibling trick of telling her she was adopted, that was never going to fly, I somehow managed to convince her that I was supposed to go to a gymnastics training center and become a famous gymnast, but I had to give that up because she came along. I am sure that she thought I was a total pain, and I know that it was hard to follow in my footsteps. She said her favorite teacher in high school was chosen because they were the only teacher in the whole school who had never called her Marcia. But she does give me credit for singing The Rainbow Connection to her through the walls between our bedrooms when she was scared at night. And when she graduated from high school, I gave her a teddy bear that she still sleeps with every night and travels with in her carry-on because she can't risk Albert getting lost with her luggage. We were not terribly close as adults. When I had kids and moved back to Portland, I'd really hoped that my family would be really involved in the lives of my kids. It's one of the reasons we moved back. And that's not how it worked out. I know that my parents and sister love my girls, but my fantasies about them having visits by themselves and forming close relationships didn't happen. And it made me sad. And for many years, Carrie and I just didn't communicate very well. She wasn't working, and I wanted her to come visit me, but she never would. I didn't understand her life as a housewife without children at home, and I wasn't very, very supportive. We would talk on the phone, and she'd complain about something, and I thought that I was supporting her, but that's not how she experienced it. I could literally see our communication mishaps, but I didn't know how to change it. 6 years ago, Carrie called me and told me that she had been in the hospital and had almost died. She was an alcoholic, and none of us, not my parents, not me, not her husband, had any idea. She was an incredibly secretive drinker, and even though alcoholism runs rampant in my mother's family, none of us had any clue. She got sober, she relapsed once more, and then she actually went to rehab and joined AA. And as she healed, our relationship began to heal as well. Since COVID, we have had the best phone conversations we've ever had. And I am so grateful that we've gotten closer. She calls my mom, who is now legally blind, and my mother is very resistant to technology. But she will let my sister call her and read to her every day for an hour or two. Carrie holds service positions for AA. As we face a future that will probably include caregiving for our parents, I'm so incredibly grateful for her and for our renewed relationship. Because we moved a lot, I don't have any friends from childhood at all. It's just Carrie. But we have each other. Frank Bruni, a writer for the New York Times, writes of his very close relationships with his 3 siblings. They still celebrate all their milestone birthdays together and choose to prioritize their relationships with one another, even when it would be easier to celebrate with nearby friends. He quotes Jeffrey Kluger, who observed to Salon in 2011 that siblings are the only relatives and perhaps the only people you'll ever know who are with you through the entire arc of life. Your parents leave you too soon, and your spouse and kids come along too late. But your siblings know you when you're in your most rudimentary form. Bruni wisely notes that this arc is based on some luck. I know many folks for whom addictions, poor choices, or untimely deaths have strained or terminated some sibling relationships. But he also notes that there is a certain amount of choice that goes into maintaining these core relationships. Some of it, like the Bruni family's choice to travel to celebrate birthdays together, is an active decision to nurture those. There's also a certain amount of luck that goes along with having compatible siblings. Like Bruni says, in some fundamental ways, we are who we are because of our brothers and sisters. He writes that, quote, "While our parents gave us values, we inadvertently assigned ourselves the roles we play. Popularity came more easily to Mark, so I resolved to be the diligent student, needing to find my own way to stand out. Because Mark and I made relatively conventional choices, Harry, for a while, made less conventional ones, his claim to a distinct identity. With siblings to help you shoulder the burden of your parents' dreams and expectations, you can flail on a particular front with lower stakes and maybe even less notice. Siblings not only pick up the slack, but act as decoys, providing crucial distraction. I sometimes joke that Carrie and I split my parents' ideas for their children down the middle. She's been married to her husband, Gene, for 24 years, and they're financially comfortable. I have a good and rewarding job and gave them grandchildren. We both have things to be proud of, and my parents love us both. My own daughters have always been close. Mika was so thrilled to be a big sister and would talk about the baby a lot. I had never had to say no to Mika as much as I did the first day I brought her baby sister home because she just wanted to touch her all the time. When they were 6 and 3, we bought them a bunk bed, figuring that they might at some point want a little separate space from the double bed they shared. But no, they chose to sleep together on the lower double bed, leaving the top bunk to stuffies and occasional playtime. They shared a room and a bed until they were 11 and 8. Marcella loves her big sister, but Mika's relationship with Marcella was intense. They were sometimes mean to each other, but we used to say that Marcella filled pretty much all of Mika's social needs. She never wanted playdates because she had her sister. I used to think I'd done something right in parenting my daughters because their close and solid relationship seemed like such a gift. But a modern love column in the New York Times by Ellen Umansky cured me of that pride. She wrote about laughing with her brother at a mutual friend's wedding. The sister of the groom approached and noted, "You guys are so close," she said. "It must be nice. Tell me, what can I do to make my daughters as close as you are?" Her tone was light, but her eyes were searching. "You want to know?" Eric said. "I'll tell you. You and your husband should separate and then go through a really ugly divorce. That'll bring your kids together." Ellen laughed. It was painful, but true. My divorce was not ugly. We lived in the same house for 2 years after we separated in order to make things easier for the girls. But I do know that they bonded to each other even more by going back and forth between houses. When Mika went off to college, she said, "I know how to be without you, and I know how to be without Jema, but I've never been without my sister." She cried at the thought that anyone could be more important to either of them than the other. At 23, her sister is no longer her most important person, but she noted she is in her closest circle of 5. I want you to know I also have Mika's permission to tell these stories. Siblings can build us up, but they can also tear us down. Sibling comparison can be one of the most painful things a kid can experience. "Why can't you just be more like your sister?" is super hard to hear. On the other hand, as Mika noted, siblings offer a great chance to practice social skills. After all, you can screw up time after time with your siblings, and they will still be in the house tomorrow. Not all of us have siblings. Our demographic push towards smaller families with fewer children mean that many of us won't grow up with these built-in friends. In some families, strong cousin relationships add to or replace the sibling relationships. Sometimes those cousins are biological, and sometimes they aren't. It was really sweet about 6 years ago when my kids realized that our relationship with my friends Tom and Rivka and their child Lior was really like that of an aunt and uncle and cousins. It makes perfect sense. I've known Tom and Rivka for 30 years now. We celebrate many holidays together and we go camping together. Lior is 6 months younger than Mika, but shares lots of interests with Marcella. And the two of them would play together for hours, while Mika sometimes played with them and sometimes read a book. Lior has biological cousins but no siblings, but these kids grew up together and are closer than they are to any of their other cousins. I'm so grateful to have a bonus kid in my life and to have my daughters have those relationships. The advantage of blood and of history is that sometimes we'll forgive things that might permanently separate us from friends. Our tech person, Sojourner, whose permission I also have, was mostly raised as an only child. She had much older half-brothers who weren't really part of her life. But when she was 8, her 13-year-old cousin moved in with her family because she didn't get along with her own mom. Sojourner looked up to her and loved her, but also sort of struggled going from being an only child to being the younger sister, and then being in the middle when her cousin had a baby at 16. Sojourner was 10 when Mark was born, and he lived with her family for the first 4 years of his life and felt like her little brother. Her cousin struggled in her own life, and the two were sometimes close and sometimes not. But when her cousin's second child, the one who Sojourner was an auntie to, was killed in a car accident a couple of weeks ago, Sojourner and her cousin were able to reconnect and remember how much they love each other, even as they are very different people. That foundation of love and blood and growing up together matters. Sometimes we need to separate from family for our own well-being. Sometimes if someone hurts you enough, you need to care for yourself by drawing boundaries. But sometimes that history is enough to salvage a relationship with someone else who is willing to try. If you have siblings, what is your relationship with them today? Are you close or not so much? Would you like to be closer? I have heard some wonderful stories from congregants about rebuilding relationships with siblings in their 60s, about the tenacity many of you have shown keeping those relationships going. And I've heard from others about your heartbreak at siblings not stepping up, whether to care for a parent or when someone needed help, or your pain and loss over a sibling lost to addiction or poverty or bad choices. Siblings are funny. When I was about to have my second child, I read something in a parenting magazine. It said, you and your husband are very much in love. Suddenly he tells you he's going to bring home a new wife. She'll be younger and cuter than you, and he'll need to spend a lot more time with her as she adjusts. But it won't change the way he feels about you at all, and he hopes that you'll love her too. But when you put it like that, it's kind of amazing that any relationship that is likely to begin with that kind of tension and big feelings turns out to be one of the closest of your life. But it often does. If you have siblings, what can you do to nurture those relationships, if that's healthy for you? If you don't have siblings, or if you don't have living siblings anymore, who else in your life knows your stories? Do you have cousins or friends that fill that role for you? What can you do to tend those relationships or to nurture them in your children? May you have your own moments of rainbow connection, my friends. Blessed be, and amen.